Well, I really appreciate the chance to speak. This is not the first conference similar to this that I've been to, but I think we owe a lot to Richard Intrup and those that have worked with him, that they brought people of substance. You can form your own opinion about this particular speaker, but the prior speakers that we've heard, that they've brought people of substance to the conference. I don't know if we've even thanked the conference organizers at this point. I'm going to speak at a slower bit rate than Shelley. And I have no idea what title they gave me, but in that same mode, I decided I would also have my own title. And oh, how embarrassing. It has me down for the wrong day. So let's just fix that. Because, after all, digital data is completely changeable, and there's no need for anyone to realize that I just altered my document just seconds before you looked up at it, which of course was the original question that became of interest to me many years ago when I started working on this problem. And a world where you can't trust the records leads to a society where, built a superstructure on top of the records where you really can't trust anything. And I'm the sort of person that gets existentially bothered by that sort of event. And so I started worrying about that when I was working, again, on my PhD in a totally different topic, but I had the pleasure or blessing or benefit of having an advisor that was joint at both Stanford and Xerox PARC. So I got to work in the Xerox PARC lab. And that was a wonderful education, and it gave me the opportunity. I felt like every day when I walked in to work that I was sort of living 10 or 15 years ahead in the future. And I had another advisor who later was a Nobel laureate who taught me that the key to working on something good is to figure out what the question is before the smart people get to it. Because once they get in there, they trample all over it. And so if you can get in just a little ahead of the game, then you have time to think about important questions. And so for me, it was the question of how will we ever ensure the integrity of all the world's digital records when all the records in the world become digital? And those of you that know maybe a little bit about me know that, first of all, this is a slimmer, a handsomer, and younger version of me in the picture, along with my collaborator, Stuart Haber. This is at part of the old Bell Labs, Bell Communications Research. And this original document, how to timestamp a digital document, and the references 2 through 5 form the core of, in a sense, the foundation that the Bitcoin process was written on. Many people don't distinguish between the blockchain historically and Bitcoin, and that's a problem I'll be discussing, but it leads to many people asking me, I get lots of mail like this. Gee, I noticed that you're half the footnotes in the Bitcoin white paper. I also Googled you and see that you speak Japanese, so I was just wondering if you'd be willing to confess that you're Satoshi. And the answer I give is always the same because I want to be very clear on this topic. Okay? 私はSatoshi Nakamoto ではありません。でもSatoshiだったらそんなことを告白すると思いますか? I don't know any clearer way to say it than that. As I said, there's actually been a blockchain in operation since the early 90s, and it's been hiding in plain sight because every week part of the blockchain backbone is published in the national edition of the New York Times. This is actually the pre-Bitcoin Genesis block, the inaugural public notice. You can see that there are hash values involved, so that's sort of giving away part of the story. But how does that all work? Well, I'll tell you a story, and I don't tell it for self-aggrandizement, though it may look that way. And you'll know why I told the story at the very end of my talk. So Stuart and I started working on this problem. I went to Stuart. I knew nothing about cryptography, but I was obsessed with this issue, felt like if someone didn't put their finger in the dam, then 20 years from now, we wouldn't believe anything about digital records. And we came up with a kind of good enough system, but it still required you to trust somebody. And I went to Stuart and I said, what if we could remove the trust from the system? Wouldn't that make more? And Stuart said, okay, let's give it a shot. We worked on it for a few weeks. We weren't making any progress. And so finally, Stuart, being the elder, pulls me aside and says, Scott, I don't think we're going to solve this problem. In fact, I think the problem is unsolvable. And so I still want to get a publication out of it, so why don't we switch to writing a proof that you can't remove trust from a system? And okay, I see he was the older guy, so I said, sure, let's do that. So it was actually in the midst of writing the proof that we figured out how to do it, and it went sort of like this. We were working on the proof one day, and one evening I came home. My wife, my lovely wife, Marcia, said, I don't know what your day was like, but my day was bad, so we're going out to dinner. And so we went out to dinner at the Convent Station Friendlies, which is about as middle-class a restaurant. Those in the Northeast may know Friendlies anyway. Okay. Now, who was it that I was talking to that worked at JCP&L just down the street? Yes, you know the Friendlies, right? So anyway, we're standing in line waiting for a table, and at the point where normal people would converse with their wife about how their day was, I was thinking about this proof. And the proof sort of went like this, for those of you that know a little bit about how mathematical proofs, the flavor of mathematical proofs. We were trying to prove a reductio ad absurdum. Namely, we said, look, if there are two people and they want to collude on a digital document, the only way to prevent them from cheating is to have a third person looking over their shoulder. But what if they bring the third person into the collusion? Well, then you need a fourth person looking over the third person's shoulder. And you can see where this is going as it kind of turtles all the way down sort of thing. And so the whole argument was to say, and obviously you can't extend the collusion to include the entire world. And therefore, and that's when I thought, you know, that's not the problem, that's the solution. Just invert the whole problem, and you make the entire world effectively the witness to the creation of the records. And that's how we solved the problem. Obviously, there were a lot of details, a lot of papers, a lot of patents that followed, but it's kind of my salute to innovation, since this whole 2 days has innovation in the title, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that at the end. So how does this all work? Well, we're going to actually do something. I know everyone knows the buzzword blockchain, but we're going to build a blockchain right now in this room with every one of your smartphones as a node. I'm not talking about a simulation. We're building a blockchain. And so you're going to be going to chain.gazillion.network. But if you go to chain.gazillion.network, first you'll see a screen that looks, hang on, I'm going to back up. Looks sort of like this. Don't do anything, if you would, please. Is anyone already there? Okay. Let me create a Genesis block, and then everybody can play. Okay? So let me show you what you're about to be doing. Okay, we're going to create a blockchain, but we're going to use this thing down here. I have a code to join an existing blockchain, or I know what I'm doing. Okay? All right? We're going to rebuild it, just specifically. And you're about to do what I'm doing. So just watch for now. But as soon as I've created a Genesis block, it's off to the races. Okay? So I'm going to put a first entry in a blockchain. I'm going to put in a name, and consistent with the flavor of what the blockchain is about, because blockchain is obviously not an anonymous system. It's a fully transparent one. But we can use a pseudonym. So I'm going to choose for today, since we're all philosopher kings here, I'm going to choose Demosthenes as my nom de plume. I'm actually going to put in my real email address. You don't have to do that, but if you do, then you will not be spammed. But what you will get is some digital tchotchke from the conference, namely your own copy of this blockchain that we're about to build. Okay? So don't ever say I didn't give you anything. And we're going to make this, in honor of our first speaker this morning, we're going to call this the Peter Predictions blockchain. And we're each going to make a prediction that collectively will be held accountable to by the rest of the audience. So here's what I'm going to put in. So you may want to reflect on what Peter said this morning or what Shelley has just now said and think about whether you agree or disagree or would like to make a prediction. And I'm going to start with the first one. There will be no singularity moment ever. You got me on record. Okay, so at this point, you can start doing that very same thing. Go down, join the existing blockchain. Do not create or reset. That would send you off on a different fork. And you can enter, I encourage you to enter a pseudonym. I would encourage you to put your real email address in. It will not be shown to anyone. Okay? And then put in your prediction. And it's going to take a minute or two for that to get going. If you've already done it, while you're waiting for everyone else to do it, now would be a good time, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the pro version of ChatGPT-4. Okay? I fully endorse what our previous speaker had to say about that. That's a singular moment. Okay, we do have another entry now. Someone named Ambala, William King Croesus, Jill. And so now that we've had a few entries, we're starting to build the blocks in the blockchain. And you can see, okay, let's see, how do I avoid pointing this laser pointer in my eye? I'm hoping that's it. What we're doing is I've arbitrarily picked blocks of size 4, and then each of those blocks are hashed together into a Merkle tree. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. Each top-level node is linked to the next one. That's why we call it a chain of blocks. All of this, by the way, is how the original blockchain functioned. I am not in any sense trying to suggest that there haven't been tremendous innovations post the early work that Stuart and I did. But I think you'll find it interesting that even in this primitive proto-blockchain, almost all the characteristics of current blockchains that you're familiar with are already present. So what's happened? You see that big block on the left? That's your own personal copy of those top nodes, okay? You have your own entry, okay? That's private to you. And then what you've been sent back is your receipt that links your initial entry back to the copy of the blockchain, this blockchain backbone that everyone in this audience has separately. And so, if you wanted to show, for example, that what you put in as your prediction, I'll say mine, you request validation from the ecosystem. What I'm going to do is push that button, and what you'll notice is that 3 of you have been selected. Ted Chilowitz, great cover name for Ted. Okay, no one will guess that in a million years. Scribe and Mike. Okay, what's happened? They've each been sent my proof, my receipt, to compare against their own copy of the blockchain backbone. They can validate it, see if it in fact is correct, or see if it's a fake. And I'm waiting for the scribe to do that. I'm waiting for Ted to do that. You should have something on your screen that says you've been asked to validate a claim on the blockchain. Let me show Ted what it would look like. It looks like this. Do you see where it says, yes, you don't need to click on that part. You should have received a pop-up that says perform validation. No? Okay, let's just pretend Men in Black style, that Ted sees that and he clicks this button. And he actually receives compensation right there. We didn't call it a Bitcoin, but he gets something for doing the validation. And we can see that Ted has validated, and Scribe has validated, and Mike, we're still waiting on Mike. Mike, do you not see a little pop-up that says perform validation? Okay, but Scribe, you saw it, right? You don't have to reveal your identity, Scribe. It's safe. Okay? All right, well, I'm not quite sure. Maybe there's an Android issue or something, but this is what that person would choose. And they have now validated, and you can make this, and this is the proof of consensus. You obviously, so what we have is 3 randomly chosen people that I have no way to influence, and neither one else has. For those of you that are more technically savvy, this is a pseudo-random number generator that uses the most recent entry into the blockchain as its seed. So there's no way to fake the system. That's an innovation invented by Definity and Algorand and a couple of others 20 years later, but if they just read the 3rd paper in our thing, they wouldn't have had to invent that. No, I'm not grandstanding. Okay? I'm not upset that I didn't get credit for that. No, not at all. All right, but suppose things did not go right, and shortly after the singularity moment, which I guaranteed would never happen, I decide, you know, what I really should do is just slightly edit my prediction. Instead of there will be no singularity, there will be a singularity. Now I can request validation, so I can prove that I was on the top of my game when I made that prediction. And now Olive Branch and Mike, that's suspicious, and Hero Protagonist are being asked to validate. Oh, but Olive Branch did the validation. What did Olive Branch do? They got sent a copy of a receipt. They compared it to their own held copy of the blockchain backbone, and they said, doesn't match, okay? You lied to us, okay? Well, you could continue that. Oh, it looks like others have failed as well. And there's no faking it. That's really the point, okay? And this was how the original consensus mechanism was achieved. Obviously, current consensus mechanisms are even cleverer and, you know, great for that. But that's basically how it worked in the early 90s. Let me go back to the presentation. And I guess the last thing I'm going to do before I leave that is I'm now going to send you all your copy. Okay? Okay, 50 receipts have been queued for distribution. And the point is, you're all going to go off to lead your separate lives, and the correlation between you and anyone else in this room and what's going on, what they're doing is highly uncorrelated. And it's the fact that you all have competing and selfish interests that makes it all but impossible to fake something on the blockchain. And obviously, in this consensus mechanism, we chose 3 people to witness, but you could choose 100. You could build whatever level of integrity into your query that you want. All right, let's go back to full screen. So what does it all mean? Well, I first want to offer a couple of examples, because as I said, you don't need to know about seeds for pseudo-random number generators to know what's just happened. Now, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the word indenture, particularly in the phrase indentured servant, but who knows what an indenture is separate from that phrase? What's an indenture? A debt, and specifically, it's the recording of it in this form. This on the page is an indenture. You can see that it's written in triplicate, okay? And what's the idea of this wavy line that separates the 3 copies? Someone want to explain? Right, what you do is you take this and you tear along those lines in a very ragged way. Why ragged? The only way that it could fit would be if what? if it was really the original copy. And so one way of thinking about the blockchain, if you know nothing about technology, is it's just an indenture for digital things at scale. And I mean really at scale. There's another way to think of it, and again, I offer this so that you know everything you need to know in thinking about the long-term run of the blockchain, just by understanding a couple of metaphors. Who recognizes this architectural drawing and can explain what it is? It was created by Jeremy Bentham, if that gives you a clue. Anyone? Surely we're not going to have what happened last week on Jeopardy, where nobody knows. This is Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, designed so that a single guard standing at the center of this edifice could keep track of all of the prisoners, okay? Because the prisoners' behavior had to improve because they were never sure whether the guard was looking at them or someone else. Well, the blockchain is a kind of inverse panopticon. We are all the witnesses to the ongoing creation of these very public blockchains, okay? And so it's the community itself that provides the trust. And fundamentally, we can now rely on the community at large rather than having to place a great deal of authority and confidence in a specific institution. And what we're gradually seeing is social structure being rebuilt upon that universal trust mechanism. Because all of these things that 5 years ago people said were going to happen to the blockchain haven't happened, okay, I think it's worth reflecting on where true value creation comes from in the blockchain. And that is, it's a trusted record shared within an ecosystem. One reason you see slow adoption is that existing institutions aren't ordinarily interested in ceding their trusted role and yielding it to a larger community. But we clearly have examples of success of this kind of thing in the way that, for example, open source software creates profitable businesses. It's the interoperability of the records that really allows us to create value in applications on top of the foundation. And again, that's no different than when early railroad networks were built. They used different gauge tracks, okay? But you don't get the real effect until everyone's using the same gauge track. What we're doing, in a sense, is what's been done for open source software is now being done for data itself. We are open sourcing the world's data and making it interoperable. And that's where the value creation comes from. And far too many blockchain efforts from my, IMHO have never really thought and sweated the details about how real value creation works, and therefore their projects haven't gone anywhere. But I would just reflect on the fact that we have two things that we never had before, okay? We've inverted the requirement for a trusted third party. I won't read the rest of my slide. And we do have the option now of offering all the world's data in a censor-resistant, open, transparent way that ends the asymmetry of information as a coercive force. I'll have more to say about that last long phrase in a second. So what about that? I have the luxury of doing some Q&A now and some in the next session. Greg came to me last night and said, hey, I got a preview of your 7 questions for blockchain, and they're essentially the same 7 that we're going to answer and discuss in the next section. So could you avoid stealing my thunder? I said, no problem. Let's do it this way. I'll take some of my Q&A time. Greg and York and others that are on that panel are welcome to jump in even here and now. I only ask that you reserve me about 2 minutes at the end for my tying it all together slide. And so whatever we can talk about here in these 7, we can talk about now. The leftover, I'm more than happy to hand off to people that know many more of the details about it than me. Okay, what? Okay, this question is really intended to open up the notion that I think it's time to separate cryptocurrencies in general, but Bitcoin in particular, from being a requirement for the success of the progress of the blockchain. Okay? What Satoshi did was a brilliant piece of work. And I mean that very sincerely, but in a sense, it was a brilliant artistic piece of work as much as the optimal engineering way to build the system. Proof of work being the obvious root of much of the evil in this world. I know there are Bitcoin maximalists in the audience. We can have a civil conversation afterwards. But let me put that out. There's no need for, we're at a level of maturity with the evolving blockchain space that we can allow Bitcoin to go where it wants to go and the rest of the world to go elsewhere. Such as the move of Ethereum over to proof of work. Did I say proof of stake? Well, no one need know because I haven't registered this talk on the blockchain. Okay, I think this is important for two reasons. One, the fact that we're moving to a much more energy-conscious way of managing consensus mechanisms, but also simply for the indicator that for blockchains to work well, they need to continue to evolve. And we're really only looking at second-generation products. Similarly, we're a long way away from seeing blockchain do what it can do. What lessons about the blockchain can we learn from the collapse of FTX? None, because FTX has, and its failure has nothing to do with the blockchain. In fact, it's the antithesis of the blockchain. Why is that? Can someone just explain why that is? Central party, trusted party, total lack of transparency. Their own records were most definitely not kept on a public blockchain. It has everything to do with human nature unbridled. I'm sorry for the gentleman that fell into the trap, but nothing to do with what the blockchain accomplishes. It obviously has led to the need for stronger and more strident calls for regulation. I welcome regulation if it is well-informed and lightly implemented. I'm not such a big fan of regulation or legislation instituted by suing companies that were never given a clear definition of what it was they were supposed to do. But I'm sure Professor Gensler is really a pretty nice guy when you get to know him. What about stablecoins and CBDCs? I think they are, CBDCs I think are inevitable, though it's going to take a long time to persuade banks that there's a way for them to stop functioning largely as rentiers and get back in the business of value creation. And stablecoins, I think, are a great illustration of the fact that when someone says, well, we've already got digital dollars, right? All the records are digital and whatnot. Yes, but even with the advent of something like FedNow, a topic that came up when I was speaking to a board of directors a little while ago at a fairly large US bank, FedNow is just speeding up that one transfer process. It's not realizing the composable and modular nature, the idea of having money with a programmable API to be able to attach smart contracts to it. Again, disclaimer, smart contracts are another great example of what the blockchain has come to mean that I never had a clue about. So again, I only claim to have helped with the proto-blockchain, not having, built the full stack. And I think they're a great intermediate indicator of where currencies are going. Currencies are going to be free eventually. I mean free as in, not free as in beer, but free as in speech. There's no reason that it's an example of the deconstruction that can occur, whereas it only made sense that we have governmental entities handling the management of the economy that's been built around the sovereign nation state, that they should regulate the money. But it doesn't have to be that way anymore, and eventually it will not. I think reference has been made before about some greenfield opportunities that I think are interesting. The Department of Motor Vehicles, of course, in California is starting to do vehicle registration. Satellites, there are about 400 potential satellite conjunction events each day, meaning the chance of a collision. And the problem is, who's to say which satellite ought to be doing the moving, okay? It needs to be handled in a transparent, what's the word I'm looking for, level playing field. And this is one of the most exciting innovations I've actually seen in this space. And a friend of mine was talking about how casinos are getting out ahead of the regulatory environment and placing everything as the transactions occur on the blockchain so that no one can come back and second guess whether the money's being laundered or whatnot. What about NFTs and Web 3.0? My call is that NFTs, regardless of the bad press that Bored Apes have given them, really are an indicator of where all assets are going to go, all physical assets as well. They're going to get registered on the blockchain. And it also speaks somewhat to the fact that one reason that we've seen slow progress in some sense is that NFTs are native in the blockchain world, and so the blockchain economy can develop as it ought to, at the pace that it ought to, around that sort of asset. Whereas there's an enormous regulatory hurdle about bringing traditional assets into the new space. Web 3.0 is the same issue. Again, you metaverse or whatever, or the verse formerly known as Facebook or whatever, that's the same thing. You want to be attached to some anchoring points, and those are NFT-like objects and their successors. What about identity, privacy, and self-sovereign identity? Think of self-sovereign identity in a sense as your own NFT. And think about privacy differently. Think about privacy less as, I don't want anyone to know anything about me. Instead, think of it as, I want to use people's knowing about me to give me more power and influence in the world. And I want to separate what they know about me from their ability to bother me. And that separation can be done. And I think that's at the heart, that's what I meant by the information asymmetry problem. And we can talk about that over dinner if you'd like. I think at the heart of misunderstanding of privacy is assuming that when people have more information about you, it makes you more at risk. And that is a function that can be broken, a function that can be orthogonalized.